this time, we've talked enough about Darwin, and I mean, we all know about Darwin. So, although you might wonder, why would we talk about Thomas Huxley on Darwin's birthday? And I'm hoping that you'll understand that when I'm done. So, Darwin's bulldog, by the way, was the title he gave to himself. He named himself that. So, he was also called Owen's ape. He did not give himself that title, but we'll find out why he got that title. Thomas Huxley, born in 1825 and so on. I just arbitrarily decided that I would divide the topic or the talk into three sections. I want to talk about Huxley the person first, so we'll just go quickly through his life, fascinating life. Then I want to talk about Huxley the scientist, and finally I'm going to talk about Huxley the advocate, because first of all, people don't really know him very well, in spite of the fact that he actually, in my opinion, superseded Darwin as a scientist. I know that's heresy in this room, but I think he really did. He has several awards that Darwin never got, and so on. Now, one of the things that you have to realize is that Huxley is basically at the opposite end of the economic scale from Darwin. Darwin was born into a relatively wealthy family, and of course he married a Wedgwood, so he had, his wife was money. So that's very important. Huxley's father was a school teacher in a private school which shut down, and Huxley had, as a result, had to drop out of school by the time he died. He'd served on 8 royal commissions on biology and pollution and that kind of thing. He had 7 leadership roles, including being president of the Royal Society of Natural Sciences at the age of 30 or something.
Wow.
What
year was that?
Well, 1855.
Wow.
So he had 7 awards, some of which Darwin never saw. And some of them are international. He was a member of the Order of the Polar Star, which is the Norwegian award, for example. He was appointed to the Privy Council, which is the inner circle of British and Canadian government. So he's essentially right next to the monarch, really. Hence the correct title for him is the Right Honourable Thomas Henry Huxley, courtesy of that. So you don't get to be a Privy Council member unless you have some pretty clear abilities and a lot of trust. And he was one of the members of the first London School Board, elected to that position, and promoted the study of science and math into public schools. Obviously he had bad luck with his own schooling, in a sense, but he was very, very much involved in public schooling. And we'll find out later, he also was involved in bringing biology into universities as a formal study. Before Huxley, biology was not in English universities, maybe nowhere in the world. And so he wanted to study biology, and so he brought that in there. He finally died, he died in 1895 at the age of 70. He had pneumonia and influenza and a heart attack. So he got done in by the health system, for lack of it. But obviously a person had a very busy life and was, at the end of his life, or even during his life, very, very well respected. And there's some real importance here for Darwin. Not just that he was Darwin's advocate, but long before that, there was some very important stuff that Huxley did for him. Now, at the age of 13, he was apprenticed to a medical doctor. And that he was actually apprenticed to a series of doctors until he was 20, and so he became interested in medicine and anatomy and all those kinds of things, physiology. And his first scientific paper at the age of 20 was a dissertation on an inner sheath of hair that he discovered, and wrote the paper. It's to this day known as Huxley's layer. And so he was very, very inquisitive, very smart young man. He was busy on his 20th year because he also passed the first medical board exam on his way to becoming a doctor. And he did so well at it that he was awarded a medal of honor because he did so well at it, and got in actually 2 medals, one for anatomy and one for physiology. He did so well. And has got a scholarship to go to do his second exam. And he never did it. And he never did it because he didn't want to be a doctor. He wanted to be a biologist. And there was no formal training for biologists at the time. And in the meantime, he was out of money. Guess what? He never had it in the first place. So he joined the Royal Navy. Now he did this for almost the opposite reason that Charles Darwin got involved. Darwin got involved with the Royal Navy because he didn't want to become the minister that his parents wanted him to become. So he ran off to the Navy and sailed around on the Beagle. Well, Huxley did it for a different reason. He needed the money. So he was assigned to be the assistant surgeon on the HMS Rattlesnake, which did similar things to the Beagle. The British Navy and Royal Navy at that time spent a lot of time and energy sailing around the world, mapping it and charting it, because they needed to know where they could get fresh water. They needed to know where they could get food, because their empire was all over the world. Okay? And just a little footnote on that, by the way, the British Navy kept sailing vessels on the high seas far longer than any other navy, for the simple reason that with a sailing vessel, you don't have to have large piles of coal everywhere you go to start your vessel. But, so that was one of the things that he did. Of course, if you're an assistant surgeon on a ship, you spend part of your day fixing broken fingers and bandaging cuts and that sort of thing. You have lots of other time on your hands. And so he made a study of invertebrate, marine invertebrates. And he coined the first term that we know of that he coined, hydrozoa. And that comes out of his study of these invertebrates. He was looking at hydroids and Sertullian polyps and medusae. Now, they're forms of jellyfish and invertebrate masses, if you like. And he called them, he said, well, look at them, they're all the same. And this is the first real example we have of Huxley doing comparative anatomy, saying this organism and that organism, even though they don't look like each other, are essentially the same. So they probably have a common ancestor. He compared the 2 cell layers, including in those animals, and they enclosed a cavity, their digestive tract, to the serous and mucous structures of embryos and higher life forms, drawing on his experience with anatomy from his medical studies. And he published a paper on that, and it became kind of the standard paper to make that connection between marine invertebrates and land vertebrate animals in terms of the embryo. So a very, very, very important kind of bridge work that he did. Now, while a lot of the scientists, including Darwin, were focusing on classifying things, they wanted to get, okay, this is this part and that's, figuring out that, Huxley wasn't all that interested in that. What Huxley wanted to do was say, well, look at this animal over here, and that animal over there, and even though they look completely different, look at the similar structures. It's called comparative anatomy, and it's a very vital tool in demonstrating that evolution is a fact, before any genetic ability or DNA or anything else. So it was very important to support that. He was one of the first scientists to make the relationship between reptiles and birds. He's one of the first guys to figure out that, hey, wait a minute, birds are evolved dinosaurs. Now, he thought that they came from Archaeopteryx because that was a flying dinosaur. And he had lots of fossils for that. Now, I want to just, the next slide shows you the difficulty that they had without any gene or DNA work to do. On the left is a picture of an Archaeopteryx fossil. Very delicate, partly missing. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you see a big chunk out of that rock, so the fossil's gone too. But what Huxley did was look at very carefully at all the structures. You can see the head bent over to the left there, there's the tail down towards the lower left, the two legs, and so on. And he was comparing all of the joints and all of these things. Now beside that, there's a chart, which I don't think you can read very well, but this is what Huxley said. Birds come from Archaeopteryx. And the modern scientists, this chart's from 2005, say, well, no, really they came from these people, Confucius sonorus birds. They are a class of microraptor. Those are the little characters that were scrubbling around in the bush, the little chipmunk-sized ones in Jurassic Park. So what we know now is they really come from pteropods or these microraptors. But when you think about it, considering what Huxley had to work with, he came very close because there's still kind of undecided how many birds come from Archaeopteryx and how many come from Can
you say that again?
It's actually easier than I'm making it. Confucius ornis. So you see what's going on there. He's way ahead of time in a lot of ways. Now, I think we have this impression that there was Darwin, and there was a whole group of Darwin followers who accepted everything Darwin said and sort of worshipped at his feet and whatever. And then there was a whole bunch of what we could call ecclesiastics or Bible thumpers who just denied everything that he said. The history is a terrible mistress because she lies to us all the time. In reality, there were people that supported Darwin but didn't support everything he said. And Huxley's one of them. He had two things that were part of Darwin's theory that Huxley didn't accept. Gradualism, which is the way the process of evolution. In Darwin's papers, just let me do a quick survey here. Everybody close your eyes. And I want everybody who's actually read The Origin of Species to put up your hand. Okay. As I suspect. Okay. One people. And I've read part of it. At any rate, but the point is that gradualism, if I can just give you a little hand demonstration here, you start out with an original life form. And this is the offspring. And as generations happen, in the gradualist theory, the gradualist idea, as generations happen, the organism changes progressively until you get this organism. The counter theory is that it happens in stages. So you get some kind of catastrophic environmental event or some significant change, and that would cause a watershed in the development. So you get something like this. And that's what Huxley thought was happening. He was convinced of that. Until fairly late in his life, when he actually came to North America, yay for him, and he got involved with a scientist in the United States who was studying American or North American horse fossils. Now this is a little confusing to us because as far as we know, there were no horses in North America when we European settlers came in. And that's true. The North American horse went extinct, presumably before even the Aboriginal peoples arrived. So there it was. But this scientist had collected a whole series of these horse fossils. And when Huxley got looking at those, and he was able to see with successive generations, he realized, wait a minute, Darwin is right. Gradualism happens. Things do evolve slowly, and there aren't really any great watershed moments. So that, he finally kind of convinced himself that gradualism was true. He never quite accepted the concept of natural selection. Huh? Exactly. That's what we think is one of the central elements of Darwin's theory. And Huxley didn't ever quite convince himself that that was true. And so, never really got there. So, he was an absolute advocate for Darwin. He felt that definitely he was right, but he didn't agree with everything Darwin said. Okay? So he's a scientist. And that's really valuable because it's important that all these, and Huxley wasn't the only one, there were numbers of others, who were working, studying this material. And of course, Darwin wasn't the first person to propose evolution. He was, people like Lamarck and other people ahead of Darwin that already proposed it with different ideas. Huxley was important also because he and a couple of friends, other scientists, convinced Darwin that it was time to publish. Darwin, I almost think Darwin had OCD problems. Those of us who have read Darwin's The Origin of Species, Peter, would you assess that? Same thing, that he's absolutely obsessed with detail. He spent 10 pages telling you over and over again all these things he studied. Darwin wasn't convinced that he'd proven the theory. He thought he had to do more research. And Huxley and his friends said, no, you got to publish this. First of all, Wallace is going to scoop you. And second, you're kind of holding the rest of us up because we have all kinds of ideas on this too. So if it hadn't been for Huxley and his friends, we might not have ever had that wonderful, thick book to read. But there it is. Now, Huxley wrote a book called which involved the relationship of man to nature. Now, this was in the frontispiece of his book. Now, you have to be careful with this diagram. This is not intended to be a Lamarck diagram. You know, the infamous Lamarck diagram, you have the amphibian crawling into the swamp, and gradually we get the apes and then the hockey players, and then we get back to real humans. No, this is Huxley's comparative anatomy thing. On the extreme left is a gibbon, which for reasons that nobody seems to understand is actually drawn twice the natural size in scale. Your orangutan, the second one from the left. The one in the middle is the chimpanzee. Didn't draw one for the bonobos, which of course is just another form of chimpanzee, but they weren't there. And the gorilla, and of course man. But what Huxley proceeded to do in this book was spend time showing people that we in fact are apes. That we have structures of the same give a common ancestor. Again, using comparative anatomy. And that brings us to his conversation his fight with Owen, who was another scientist, who, by the way, accepted Darwin's theory of evolution, but could not accept that we were members of the ape family. So it's not as clear cut as we think it is. That we have these people who rejected Darwin, these people who accepted him. Some of them accepted part of Darwin and so on. Owen was also the guy that put Wilberforce up to debate with Huxley with disastrous results for Wilberforce. But the point is that Huxley and Owen never agreed on this comparison with the apes. And Huxley basically was able to demonstrate to the scientific community by examining the skulls of various types of human beings that in fact we were related because of the shapes of the skulls and so on. Owen never quite accepted it, and as he was the guy that gave Huxley the Owen's ape title again.
Well, if they didn't accept natural selection, did they have an idea as to what was the driving force, or?
I've never found that. I think Huxley was still tied to his religious being a little bit.
Oh, I see. Okay. So there was just, or he regarded it as sort of a natural progression, is that it? But perhaps divinely guided.
Perhaps. But I think one of the key elements of natural selection, as I understand it, is you have to have a reaction to the environment. And I'm not sure that Huxley was quite in tune with that. At any rate, this was part of the great debate that Huxley had with Owen, was this whole issue around age. And also with Wilberforce, and of course the debate is a famous one that made Huxley even more famous. At one point in the debate, Wilberforce was exasperated because he was being manhandled by Huxley. And he said, well, tell me, Mr. Huxley, are you descended from monkeys on your grandmother's side or your grandfather's side? Of course, it was nonsense about monkeys. We got nothing to do with monkeys, right? But Huxley responded that he'd be far rather to have monkeys on his ancestry from either side than to misuse an intelligence the way Wilberforce did. So, so he was a skilled debater as well as obviously very well educated, if informally educated man. So what about Huxley the advocate? Okay, well he named himself Darwin's bulldog because at the time that was a common university expression for someone who was very determined and who was going to carry the colors of the university into hell itself, I guess. And he argued with Wilberforce in support of evolution, and I talked about that a little bit. But that was kind of an ongoing, and they had one big debate. And of course, as is the case with most debates like this, to get quite a bit of publicity. And Wilberforce's side and friends were convinced that Wilberforce had won, and Huxley's side was convinced he had won, and everybody went away happy. Differed with Owen on man as an ape, differed with Darwin on natural selection, advocated for biology in universities, very, very significant contribution that this wasn't there before. Now, he was criticized when he set up the study of biology in universities. People felt that he was giving students very, very carefully selected examples. And so they felt that he was, in fact, guiding them, not giving them the right ability to think for themselves. Needless to say, a lot of those critics were the theists in the group. So that he was, you're slanting this so you'll move them away from the Bible. Yes, Margaret?
So when he started the biology in the university, is it that's when it became its own specialized area, or was it not studied at all before?
Oh, it was a specialized area, but it was never in the university. So anyone who wanted to get into biology went into medicine, basically, which is kind of the path he was on, and then he just decided, no, I'm going to do it myself.
Oh.
So it was just that there was no formal and he also advocated for strong public education, which I talked about before. So he was very much involved in this society and spent almost 30 years or more promoting Darwin's theory of evolution. And of course, part of that, the benefit of that is it's what put it on the map. Now, the other part of Huxley, of course, this whole idea of the agnostic philosophy, very misunderstood. What Huxley was doing when he came up with this, first of all, he studied philosophers. He studied philosophers a great deal. So he knew full well that there were all kinds of true skeptics there. There were lots of philosophers before him who said, you can't say something is true unless you have the evidence that's there. And lots of people said that, probably as far back as Thales or Epicurus or whatever. So it's not an original idea for him, but he was concerned about how he could get this kind of philosophy expressed in some succinct way. And so he eventually came upon what by that time was an English word, Gnostic. It was stolen from the Greeks. The English language does that, it soaks up. But you have to understand that the word Gnostic means one who knows through faith, who claims to know through faith. And an agnostic then is someone who does not know through faith. In other words, just rejects the idea of being able to know anything just through faith. So he really he was talking to young scientists. He was not talking about religion at all. He was talking about science. And what he was saying was, you must follow the evidence to get you to the truth. And the basic process to do that is, in Huxley's mind, and I think many following agnostics, is you start out just looking at the world around you and saying, well, okay, there it is, that's interesting, let's have a look at that. So here I am on the high seas, with some time on my hand. Let's look at some invertebrate, some marine invertebrates. He didn't have a hypothesis to work with. He said, let's have a look at them, see what there is. Having done that, he then formulates some hypothesis which he can move forward with and collect evidence. But the danger sometimes in science is you come up with an idea, and that you're trying to treat it as a theory and try to find the evidence to support it. So you have a confirmation bias going on. What Huxley's saying is that you have to follow the evidence to find truth. And the second thing he says is without evidence, you cannot know. It's not possible to say you know something unless you have evidence. It seems kind of patently obvious, but it's amazing how many people get hung up on it. And so he was really talking to them. It wasn't until later that somebody challenged him to say, well, what about God then? How do you deal with that? And he said, well, there is no evidence one way or the other for things metaphysical. We don't have any evidence of whether God exists or not, so therefore we cannot know. And of course, to this day, we get some of the conservative atheists go ranging us. I mean, Richard Dawkins, and how many people have read the Dawkins? Remember, his books are what, about that thick? He spends about that much of it railing against the church and religion and how bad it is, and then proceeds to use the church definition of agnostics to attack agnostics. Come on, Richard, get your act together. He's out of his wheelhouse anyway. He's a biologist writing about philosophy. Shouldn't happen. So what he's saying about agnostics is simply wrong. We don't sit on any fences. We're determined that we have to have evidence to know something. And at any rate, so what Huxley said about the existence of God was, in the absence of evidence, one way or the other, we cannot know. Now that obviously makes you an atheist because the original definition of the word atheist, I feel, is without God. Well, if you don't know there's a God, if you cannot know there's a God, then you're without God. There are some people in the humanist movement in Canada who get very upset when I say that. Anyway, but that's what he was doing. He was not trying to preach against religions at that point. Anyway, that's Thomas Huxley, and his statement is the man of science, the man, by the way, the man of science has learned to believe in justification, not by faith, but by verification. So, in other words, you follow the evidence. So he was a very significant guy in science himself, but he also was one of the many people. You can't get a theory like a theory of evolution to survive unless you have lots of different scientists who come up with the same number and verify. Question? Not that I can answer. Questions?
Why are humanists upset by what you just said?
Oh, there's some they are claim to be members of the humanist movement, but they're actually what I call traditional atheists. And they make the statement that there is no God. Well, in my philosophical world, if you say make a statement, then you better be able to prove it. And of course they can't. And that's the problem with Richard Dawkins, that the God delusion makes a statement there is no God, but he has no evidence. Well, now he's backed off of it. Well, I'm 99% sure
But how can you prove what doesn't exist doesn't exist?
Yeah, that's hard to prove.
You can't.
You can't. That's hard to prove.
So they shouldn't make
does
the,
exist.
they shouldn't make the statement. That's all I'm saying. It's a bad philosophical position to take.
But you know, there is something in here that looks like I have read it elsewhere. Okay, because the way it is moving, I've been lately very much interested in cosmology. Okay, and I have a book there where the author keeps talking about free discovery. As you people do work, specialists in the subject, okay, people are really well known for what they're doing. They come up with different ideas. Some of them close to what it is, some of them it's not. But it's among these ideas that eventually the real thing will come out. That's the statement that he is trying to say. And I think in here too, it's the same thing. Don't expect it the thing to be just right and just wrong. It will lead to something else that will be better than what it is. And that's very important.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's gotta be a basic
Positive
scientific
progress.
principle. Yeah. Now what Huxley was saying was, and of course he was talking to young scientists who were really conflicted because their religious families were saying to them, you know, you have to, when you do the study of science, you must make sure that it matches God's word. That you can't disagree with the Bible. And Huxley was saying, no, go with the evidence. And that's one of the reasons he was talking about it. But not so much that he was challenged. But yeah, that's, yeah.
Now, what was holding Darwin up from publishing the book? Was it because fear, the backlash? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that, and also I guess that fear led him to think I really better have all the possible evidence I can for this. And I mean, the God delusion, the origin of species is just prove everything. And then he wasn't really. And the other problem is that his wife was, she was Unitarian, as I understand. But so he kind of had to get it past her.
Yeah, and she was afraid of what society would do to them if he.
And indeed, to some extent, it happened. The church friendships were lost and so on. It's really, I find interesting that Huxley was very open about this support for evolution, and yet obviously he was very accepted by society. You know, he's appointed to all these school boards or voted in the school board, and he's on the Privy Council and so on.
But
part of it, I think, is the other part with Darwin is that Darwin is almost a recluse. Part of it is a health issue, but Darwin was not that. He wasn't as outgoing as some scientists. He really was happiest in his own little lab doing his more studies.
But if Huxley, embraced the evolution, but did he talk about it? Or did he only just say, come on, Darwin, you got to publish this?
Well, well, for one thing, remember, he was working with Darwin, translating German papers for him. So he knew all about he knew the manuscript before it was ever published.
Yeah. But
And
when
so
he
none of
was,
us did. But so he was very much saying to Darwin, publish it.
yeah,
But he was also publishing his papers himself that were in support of theory of evolution.
oh,
The idea
even
of a
before,
common,
okay.
common ancestry and this comparative anatomy stuff, as other scientists were too. Darwin, we tend to think of Darwin as the great watershed. That he somehow was, the first guy to think of this stuff. He really wasn't. He was the first one to put it all in one book and put it together, which was why Huxley and his friends wanted to publish it.
Yeah.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Darwin. Happy birthday to you.
It's okay.
This is compensation. Any other questions before we get into the real matter?